In this episode of EpicSolo, we're going to do a combat tutorial for Swords and Wizardry Complete Revised by Matt Finch and Mythmere Games. Before we begin, it is worth noting that OD&D offered essentially no information about the order in which combat takes place, other than the fact that there is a surprise roll at the beginning of combat and that the battle is divided into rounds. The game referred readers to a set of wargaming rules for mass combat by the same publisher, but there were no specific guidelines for smaller scale battles. Each set of players simply took those wargaming rules and adapted them in whatever way they liked. Power to the people. Swords and Wizardry provides a bit more starting guidance from the original game's later sources, so you can start playing with less preparation. Once you get going, though, it is essentially the same idea. Add what you like, remove what you do not. The game is yours to adapt. And we're still doing that at our own table some 50 years later. I love it. Let's get started. So for this tutorial, we are going to keep things simple. That means that we have a party of 4 first-level characters squaring off against 6 kobolds. We're also going to be using the optional ascending armor class rules. Let's take a look at the stats before we begin. So for the player's party, we have the half-elven magic user Malfak, the human fighter Cassius, the halfling thief Pendor, and the dwarven cleric Gonzar, which I have allowed as a house rule because the combination of an ancestry of dwarf and the cleric class is not a legal combination in the Swords and Wizardry rules as written. But in the spirit of OD&D, we play the game just exactly how we want to, and I encourage you to do the same. For the referee's party, we have a group of 6 kobolds. They are a less than 1 hit die monster with an armor class of 12 and no attack modifier. How do we know that? Because in this amazing rules light system of Swords and Wizardry, determining the base attack of any monster is as simple as adding their total hit die to their attack roll. Less than 1 hit die, 0. 1 hit die, +1. 5 hit die, +5. And so on and such forth. It is awesome. I love it. All right, now that you're acquainted with our party and our adversaries, let's talk about initiative and the order of battle. When the party of adventurers comes into contact with enemies, the order of events is as follows. 1. Check for surprise. 2. Declare spells. 3. Determine initiative. 4. Movement and missile fire. 5. Melee combat and spells. And 6. The round is complete. So let's start with step 1. Check for surprise. The referee determines if a surprise roll is required, and if so, both sides roll to see if they are surprised by the sudden encounter. In general, a group cannot be surprised if they are already aware of an opponent's presence, even though they have not yet seen them, due to hearing them on the other side of a door, for instance. If one side is surprised, the other side automatically gets to take actions before the first initiative roll. If they also win that initiative roll, this means they will have taken 2 actions before the other side has a chance to do anything. If surprise is a possibility, roll 1d6 for either or both groups as appropriate. Roll only once for each side, not for each individual character or monster. If the result is a 1 or a 2, the group is surprised. A party that includes a monk or a ranger, however, is surprised only on a roll of 1. It is possible for both groups to be surprised, effectively canceling out the effect on both sides. And here is something really nasty. If a group is surprised, each person or creature in it has a 1 in 4 chance to drop 1 or more handheld items. Underground or in a dungeon, the distance between 2 groups when they discover each other is 1d6 times 10 feet. That is very close. The monsters may already be inside the radius of the adventurer's light source. Outside, the distance will be about 10 times this number, or if the visibility is bad, 3 times. Anything affecting visibility could also affect surprise distance. For instance, someone with dark vision will be able to see up to 60 feet clearly at night or underground. A party carrying a light will be visible from much farther away, raising the possibility of an ambush. Other factors that may affect surprise are related to terrain types. Thick woods or crowded city streets may decrease visibility and make it easier to surprise travelers. These and similar factors are left up to the judgment of the referee. Take note, monsters do not always leap to the attack. Unless they are on the alert For intruders, the referee may roll 2d6 to determine whether the monsters attack if they surprise the adventurers. On a roll of 2 to 6, the monsters are hostile and attack. On a roll of 7 to 9, the monsters withhold judgment and wait to see if the adventurers are hostile. On a roll of 10 to 12, the monsters have a positive initial reaction to seeing the adventurers and might even be convinced to offer some help, if they are well paid, of course. All right, so in this particular encounter for our tutorial, I, the referee, have determined that neither side is surprised. So we are going to move on to step 2, declare spells. Any player whose character is going to cast a spell must say so before the initiative roll. The referee makes a similar determination for the opponents. The casting of any spell starts at the beginning of the combat round. Thus, if the enemies win the initiative roll and damage the spellcaster, the spell's casting may be disturbed and the spell lost. This is the Swords and Wizardry interpretation of several places in the original rules where a spell must be, quotation marks, ready. All right, so the only character on either side that will be declaring a spell this round is our half-elven magic user, Malfac. And Malfac is going to declare Magic Missile, because if I declared Sleep or something like that, it wouldn't be much of a tutorial now, would it? So Malfac has declared a Magic Missile spell, which means that the next step is going to be very important, because if Malfac is attacked before he has an opportunity to cast, the spell is lost forever. Well, not forever, but definitely until a full 8 hours of rest has been achieved. And so let's see what happens in step 3, roll for initiative. At the beginning of a combat round, each side rolls a d6 for initiative, the opportunity to act first. The side with the highest roll wins, and that group acts first. Initiative rolls may result in a tie, and when this happens, the referee may choose to resolve the actions as if they are simultaneous, or have both sides re-roll. Time to roll them bones. The monsters will be the red dice, and the players will be the white dice. All right, that's a tie. And so at our table, that means we're going to re-roll. The monsters roll a 6, the players roll a 2, and that means the monsters have 1 initiative, and they're going to act first. So with the monsters winning initiative and acting first, it is now time for step 4, movement and missiles phase. Winners of the initiative roll take any movement, including any movement-like actions that might happen in combat, such as climbing onto tables or swinging from ropes. Missile fire would also include things such as pushing a boulder off a cliff. The results, deaths, etc., take effect, and then the losers of the initiative roll have their turn to move or fire missiles. It is not possible for the winners of the initiative roll to wait and see what the foes do. They either move or they don't. It is up to the referee whether missile fire includes both shots from a weapon with a rate of fire higher than 1. A longbow, for example, shoots twice in 1 round. In many games, only the first shot is allowed in this phase, with the second shot being fired after melee and spells are resolved. Let's talk about combat movement in Swords and Wizardry, something that for a few people might perhaps be the most confusing concept to grasp as it pertains to combat. And for this encounter, we are going to refer to the indoor, underground, and city movement table. Now, a turn represents 10 minutes, and a round represents 1 whole minute of combat. Keep that in mind when you see these movement rates. So in Swords and Wizardry, the base movement rate times 10 feet is how far the character can move in 1 round. Thus, if your base movement is 6, 60 feet. If it's 9, 90 feet. If it's 12, 120 feet. That's a lot of movement, and I like it because you're dashing around and you're battling your foes. Alternatively, perhaps running for your life. If some of the characters leave a combat, usually to circle around, they continue to move at the combat movement speed until they re-enter the combat area. This is actually faster than ordinary running speed and incurs all the disadvantages of running. So what can be a bit tricksy here is translating the base movement rate number from a character sheet or a stat block. Tricky only because it's unique in comparison to several other versions of the world's greatest fantasy role-playing game. For example, you don't have 30 feet of movement. But once you get it, there's nothing to it but to do it. So let's take a look at the Kobold stat block. Now here we can see that the Kobold has a movement rate of 6. Again, the base movement rate times 10 is how far the character can move if they're not encumbered. Don't forget about that. But a Kobold with a movement of 6 can move 60 feet in a combat round. 6 times 10 equals 60 feet. The Swords and Wizardry rules as written don't explicitly define whether movement or missiles happen first. Again, it's movement and missiles, not movement then missiles. And so it would be logical to assume that if there were any ranged attacks that would benefit from happening before movement, they may take place at this time. Again, add what you like, remove what you don't. The game is yours to adapt. And so that is how we are going to rule it. Make it work for you. We use some logic there to make that combat make sense. Again, it's an abstraction of what is happening in our mind's eye anyway, right? But we want to be consistent. And so 2 of these kobolds have ranged attacks, one with a crossbow and the other a short bow. Because they are less than 1 hit die creatures, they will not be getting any bonus to their attack. If they were a 1 hit die monster, they would get a +1. If they were a 2 hit die monster, a +2. You get the idea, simple stuff. So if you're familiar with old school essentials and BX, and I imagine quite a few of you are, you're going to notice something quite a bit different about the combat sequence in Swords and Wizardry. In old school essentials, the side that won initiative is going to have the opportunity to perform movement, missile attacks, cast spells, and melee attacks. Then the side that lost initiative is going to perform those same steps. But in Swords and Wizardry, you're doing those things in the same step because each combatant on the side that won initiative may move or may fire any missile weapons. Then the losers of the initiative roll may move or fire missile weapons. So that's happening in the same step. Strategically, that's an absolute game changer. It's quite a bit different and it's quite a bit awesome. So with the kobolds winning initiative and us ruling earlier that missile attacks can happen in this phase before movement, it's advantageous for 2 of these kobolds to take their missile attack. And so the one on the far left there, that's going to be Hagnar. And Hagnar has a crossbow, and he's going to be attacking Cassius. The one on the far right, that's Guru. And Guru's going to be taking a shot at Gonzar with a short bow. Missile attacks are attacks with a ranged weapon such as a bow, crossbow, sling, or a thrown axe. A character's dexterity bonus for missile attacks is added to the 2-hit roll when the character is using missile weapons, and fighters may receive an extra bonus for strength. When using missiles to attack into melee, it usually is not possible to choose which participant, opponent or friend, will receive the attack. The referee determines this randomly. And so how we would rule that, we don't have any combatants in melee right now, but if we did, let's say it was 2, I'd roll a d6. On a 1 to 3, it would be that combatant. On a 4 to 6, it would be that one, so on and such forth. And so be careful when firing into melee. There are no range bonuses for missile weapons, but there are range penalties and limitations. Let's bring up a list of the available missile weapons. Let's focus on the light crossbow because Hagnar the Kobold is going to be attacking Cassius with his light crossbow. If we look at damage, it says C bolts light. If we take a look at light bolts, we see that it's 1d4 plus 1 damage. It's got a rate of fire of 1. It's got a range of 60 feet, and that's important because shooting or throwing beyond this range is at a -2 penalty to hit. The weapon cannot reach farther than twice this range. So with our light crossbow, we're going to be able to fire a bolt up to 60 feet. After 60 feet, it's going to incur a -2 penalty, and after 120 feet, the weapon cannot reach. Outdoors, these range increments are tripled. So with a light crossbow, we could shoot up to 180 feet without a penalty, and up to 360 with a -2 penalty. Anything after that, it's not accurate enough. You're going to have a bunch of different missile weapons with different ranges, rates of fire, and damage. But that's our crossbow, and we're going to take a shot right now. Hagnar the Kobold will be attacking Cassius with a light crossbow from 25 feet with a base attack of 0 because he is a less than 1 hit die monster. Cassius has an armor class of 16. He is wearing full plate and is carrying a shield. An unarmored character has an armor class of 10. The plate mail gives him +6 and the shield +1 for a total of 17. But his dexterity score of 7 makes his armor class worse by 1 point for a total armor class of 16. We're going to roll a d20 and add any attack modifiers. There are none. And so it's just straight up. Here we go, d20. 17 is going to hit. So we're going to roll 1d4 plus 1 damage. Cassius is going to take 3 damage, bringing him to 6 of 9 hit points. Now, you might make the mistake of assuming that I'm rooting for the adventurers, but I'm a referee. I am an impartial and fair arbiter of the rules, and so I'm just here to run the game. And I'll tell you right now, Cassius just took a bolt to the arm, and he's sitting on 6 hit points. This other kobold who's about to attack next is going to have 2 shots. And so you can see very quickly, it's a different kind of combat. And we'll see who wins right now. Maybe somebody out there can cheer for Malfac and company, but I'm not cheering for anybody. I want to see what happens. Here we go. So up next is Garou, and he's got his short bow, and he's going to attack Cassius. And I know what you're thinking. You're thinking, hey, didn't you say that he was going to attack Gonzar before? I did, but it doesn't matter, because the only thing that you need to declare is if you're going to cast a spell, and the game state has changed. And I think that's something that a lot of people miss about a lot of these old school combat sequences, is that the game state is constantly changing, and there's a layer of strategic complexity that is very interesting, especially when paired with a rules light system where you can use your imagination. And so I hope you're getting somewhat of an idea. I don't know how imaginative I'm going to be in this tutorial. I want to keep it basic, but you start to get the idea. And so the game state has changed. Garou is going to attack Cassius with the short bow. Cassius has an armor class of 16. No bonuses to attack, a straight up d20. 13's going to miss. So with the missile attacks complete, the other 4 kobolds are going to move to engage our party. They have a base movement of 6, and underground and in combat, it's times 10. So 6 times 10, 60 feet. So they're going to move. So with the monsters having 1 initiative, the kobolds were able to move first and do missile fire. And now it is the side that lost, the player's turn. Again, this is still step 4. We're doing our movement and missile fire in the same step. So before we have any movement or missile fire, let's take a look at weight and movement. Weight is listed in pounds. A normal level of miscellaneous equipment, not including armor and weapons, is assumed to weigh 10 pounds. Treasure is added to this, with each coin and gem weighing 1/10 of a pound. These are big, heavy coins and gems, but that is just the way of things in a fantasy world. Coins should clink, and gems should be the size of dice. All characters, depending on the weight of the armor and equipment they are carrying, have a base movement rate as follows. Take a look at the base movement rate chart, and you can see that there's 4 different base movement rates based on the weight carried. Up to 75 pounds, 12, 76 to 109, 101 to 156, and 151 to 300 pounds, with 300 pound being a max, a base movement rate of 3. But remember, the carry modifier from strength, if any, is added to that total. So for example, an adventurer with a carry modifier of plus 10 can carry up to 85 pounds before dropping from a movement rate of 12 to a movement rate of 9, while a person with a carry modifier of negative 10 would drop to a movement rate of 9, even if carrying only 66 pounds of equipment. For this tutorial, our party is traveling light. Very light. In fact, all they have are their weapons and their armor. Cassius is carrying plate armor, which is 70 pounds, a shield, which is 10 pounds, and a longsword, which is also 10 pounds, for a total of 90 pounds. But he has a plus 10 carry modifier from a strength score of 15. That reduces the weight to 80 pounds, which is 5 pounds over the 75 pound limit, to keep his base movement rate at 12, which is the best. It puts him at a 9 for a base movement rate. Again, in combat, underground, 9 times 10 equals 90 feet. Not bad for full plate, but keep in mind, a round in Swords and Wizardry represents 1 minute of combat. Compare that to, say, 6 seconds a round, or even 10 seconds a round. 60 seconds is a lot of time. And so the base movement in combat makes more sense for this type of an abstraction. Only one of our player characters is going to move. Pendor is going to move 10 feet to position himself to get an attack on the kobold on the far right tacklack. And as much as I would prefer to make a ranged attack, the kobolds have moved into position to force the melee. And in keeping the ruling simple, any missile attack into melee will be subject to a random roll to determine which combatant is hit. I don't want to take that chance. Now, there's a lot of wiggle room here for rulings and house rules when using miniatures. Line of sight, covers factor in, but in this particular encounter, Pendor doesn't have a clear shot to any of the kobolds not engaged in melee, and so Pendor will move. Our magic user Malfac is unable to move because in step 2, he declared that he would be casting Magic Missile, and casting a spell is considered a sole action and requires concentration. So when casting a spell, there is no movement. If you are not casting a spell or performing a missile attack, you can move and make melee attacks in step 5. Which will bring us to Cassius and Gonzar, who are in melee. Now, there's not a rule as written for being engaged in combat, but what we do have is a section for movement within melee. For purposes of swords and wizardry, a defender effectively blocks an area about 5 feet across, and enemies cannot simply move through this area without first killing the defender. Alternatively, the referee might allow such movement but grant a free attack to the defenders in the area. The referee's common sense ultimately controls the situation, but it is good for players to have some idea of what results their tactics will have. Whatever rule a referee chooses for this should be applied consistently unless the situation is quite unusual. Let's take a look at the author's note to better inform our ruling for movement within melee. The original game contains no rules about what happens if an attacker wants to move directly past an opponent. So this is wide open territory for house rules. Maybe having a shield allows a defender to block someone completely, but if the defender has no shield, opponents can move through if they survive a free attack. House rules on this could also relate to rules for overbearing an opponent, which are described below under unarmed combat. The referee makes the final call. And I think the most important thing to extract from this particular rule, but it can be applied to every rule, and it should be applied to every rule or ruling that you make, is that they should be applied consistently. However you interpret it, it should be applied consistently. And so how I interpret the movement within melee rule is very straightforward. The 5 feet across referenced in the rule pertains to the 5 feet of space the combatant occupies. This means that if an opponent attempts to move through an occupied space, the combatant occupying that space will get a free attack. Now, there's another rule for retreating that when we put them both together gives us a consistent ruling for movement within melee. It is up to the referee to decide if there will be any special rules for retreating away from a melee combat. Most referees allow the enemy a free attack if a hero or monster tries to move out of the 10-foot melee range. In some cases, the free attack is made at a +2 to hit. So if Cassius attempted to move 5 feet to his left, the kobold Sniv would get a free attack at +2 to hit because Cassius would be considered retreating by moving out of the 10-foot melee range. At our table, we do allow movement within melee without a free attack as long as the combatant is not entering an occupied space or retreating from a 10-foot melee range. So what that means is that while Sniv would get a free attack, the other kobolds, Erix and Sick, would not, because although Cassius has moved, he has not entered an occupied space or retreated from either of their respective 10-foot melee ranges. So that is just one particular ruling for movement within melee based on the text. If you would prefer a more robust tactical ruling borrowed from other adjacent games, such as the concept of each adjacent 5-foot square a combatant occupies to be subject to a free attack if an opponent attempts to move through it, go right ahead. But I would say that for our game, opening up the movement allows for more interesting encounters and tactics. Regardless of how you rule it, remember to be consistent with your rulings. Keep in mind, many people playing this game are not playing with miniatures. Many of the rulings and interpretations that the author encourages are for precisely these reasons. Imagine attempting to adjudicate free attacks in 5-foot adjacent threatened or blocked squares while playing without miniatures. The word square really isn't used anywhere in the rules, and yet you know exactly what I am referring to because we are using miniatures. And so the concept of a square, a 5-foot space or area, becomes a necessary abstraction for clarity and consistency. And so make a ruling for your table, for your play style, and let's move on. So with both sides having moved and taken any missile attacks, we're going to move on to step 5, melee combat and spells. First, all members of the side that won initiative may make hand-to-hand melee attacks if they are in melee range of an opponent, and the damage from these attacks is inflicted. Enemies might die. Spells are cast and take effect. Next, the losers of the initiative roll make their melee attacks and cast their spells. Anyone who was killed by the winners of the initiative roll is already dead and cannot attack. Turning undead also takes place in this phase. So one clear difference from the movement and missile fire phase is that the rules explicitly indicate that melee attacks occur first before spells. No ambiguity there. And so with the kobolds having 1 initiative, we're going to have 4 melee attacks. Let's take a look at melee attacks. A melee attack is an attack with a handheld weapon such as a sword, spear, or dagger. It is possible to make a melee attack only when the 2 combatants are within 10 feet of each other, and 2 combatants within 10 feet of each other are considered to be in melee. We discussed it a bit earlier. There's no such term as engaged, but there definitely is in melee. And we use that as a precedent for our other rulings that pertain to movement and movement within melee. So again, if they're within 10 feet of each other or they're adjacent using our miniatures, they're going to be considered in melee. For the purpose of this tutorial, the kobolds are going to be attacking with the equivalent of a short sword. Maybe they've got a little spear or something like that. But if they hit, they're going to do 1d6 damage. Now they're going to get a 0 for an attack bonus because they're a less than 1 hit die creature. Now the one on the far right, Eric's, is going to be attacking Cassius, and Cassius has an armor class of 16. 13 is going to miss. Up next is Sick, and he's also going to attack Cassius. Again, armor class of 16, no bonus. A 5 is going to miss. So Sniv is going to attack our Dwarven Cleric Gonzar. Now, Gonzar has an armor class of 18. He has the exact same armor as Cassius, but he has a dexterity score of 14, and that is going to give him a +1 bonus to his armor class. He's become one of my all-time favorite characters. Let's see what happens. Again, no attack bonus and an armor class of 18 for Gonzar. 11 is a miss. Last up for the kobolds is Taklak, and he's going to attack Pendor, our halfling thief, who has an armor class of 13. He's wearing leather armor. It's going to give him a +2, and he does have a dexterity bonus with that awesome 18 dexterity for +1. So 13 armor class. Here we go. And an 8 is going to miss. And so all 4 attacks from the kobolds miss. Lame. No magic users for the kobolds, so that means we're going to move on to the losers of initiative, the players, the losers. They're going to get to do their melee attacks, and Malfak, our magic user, is going to cast a magic missile. So let's go. So before we make any player attacks, let's take a look at the quick method for ascending armor class combat. And what we have here is a table for alternate quick method of calculating hits with ascending armor class. What you're going to get is a 2-hit bonus based on your class and your level. Very simple stuff. At first level, all of our classes are going to receive a +0 2-hit bonus. So Cassius is up first, and he's going to be attacking the kobold Eric's with his longsword. Again, he's going to have that 0 2-hit bonus, but he does have a +1 from his strength. Remember, only fighters are going to get to add their strength bonus to melee attacks. So here goes. He's trying to hit an armor class of 12. And that right there, my friends, is a natural 20. That's going to be a critical hit. Let's take a look at the Swords and Wizardry rules as written for their optional critical hit and fumble rule. So in parentheses, it says house rule. And so this is something that Matt Finch has written into the rules of Swords and Wizardry. Critical hits and fumbles. Many referees have house rules that state that a natural to-hit roll of 20, one achieved without using any modifiers, is an automatic hit, and or that a natural roll of 1 is an automatic miss and may result in the attacker dropping his or her weapon or suffering some kind of other problem. A strained muscle might give it a -1 penalty to damage rolls for the rest of a combat, or a helmet knocked awry might cover a character's eyes until a round is taken to fix it. I love it. This is up to the referee. Some referees even allow a natural roll of 20 to inflict double damage, but we do not recommend this for swords and wizardry because it winds up being too powerful. A +1 bonus to damage for a natural 20 would fit the system better. And so you know what? We're going to take Matt Finch's word for it. We're going to allow it to be an automatic hit, and we're going to give Cassius a +1 bonus to damage. So before we roll damage, let's take a look at the strength table here. You're going to see it's not 1-for-1, meaning, yes, I get that +1 to-hit modifier with my strength score of 15, but I've got a +0 for damage modifier. And so it's just going to be a straight 1d8, but because of the critical hit, I'm going to get a +1 to damage. So we're going to be rolling d8 +1 damage. That's going to be 5 damage, and our kobolds are going to have 2 hit points each. They're 1d4 hit points, and so we're just going to cut it right in half. And what that means is with the first death, we're going to use the optional morale rules to see what happens. The original game did not include many specific rules for morale, probably because players were intended to refer back to the rules for the chainmail game. Those rules used a 2d6 check for morale when a unit suffered losses over a certain percentage. If you want to play using morale rules, we suggest using the following optional system, which we have also made compatible with basic and expert by flipping the die roll used in the original game, where a lower roll indicated a morale failure. How it works: each type of monster has a morale rating between 2 and 12, with 2 representing creatures that absolutely don't fight and 12 representing mindless creatures that always fight to the end. The referee may assign these numbers. There are 2 times when a morale check is called for during combat: when a side loses its first casualty and when they lose half their number in combat to death or incapacitation, including sleep paralysis, etc. To make a morale check, the referee rolls 2d6 for each monster or NPC on the side. And if the result is higher than the creature's morale rating, the check is failed and the individual surrenders or retreats. So with the kobolds having lost their first casualty, we're going to make a morale check. Now we're going to have to roll 5 times, once for each kobold. And if we roll higher than their morale rating of 6, a 7 to a 12, that means that they're going to surrender or retreat. So here we go, right down the line, starting with Hagnar. Hagnar is going to flee because we rolled a 9. 9 is higher than 6, and so he is going to flee. All right, on to Garou. Garou is going to flee, so both of their missile attackers are fleeing. On to Sick. And Sick is also going to flee. They're not very brave. So 3 of these kobolds are going to flee. Let's see what happens with Sniv. Sniv's going to stay and fight. Look at that. The double 1s. I like it. All right. And Taklak. Taklak is also going to flee. And so only one of these kobolds, Sniv, is going to stay and fight. And for our tutorial, that's just fine. But morale can be an absolute game changer. I love morale, especially for monsters like this. They're kobolds. They're not very brave. Cassius got a critical hit and killed one of them, and the rest of them are like, I'm out of here. I want no part of this tutorial. So as you can see, the optional morale rules are a game changer. You might not like that sort of thing, but I think it's awesome. Remember, different monsters are going to have different morale ratings, and I like the idea that weaker monsters are more apt to retreat in battle. There's a very good chance that with weaker monsters like this, there's another group waiting right around the corner in your dungeon. Maybe even some of the retreating monsters have decided to regroup. A few notes on timing and mechanics here. At our table, I would have not had the monsters flee until their next turn. They would have had to wait until they had movement to retreat. I would have also given the players a free attack at +2 to hit because the monsters were retreating. But hey, it's a tutorial, and so our not so brave little kobolds have retreated to fight another day, except for Sniv, the littlest and bravest of all the kobold warriors. So we're going to forego our 2 attacks by Gonzar and Pendor, much to their chagrin, because I can promise you that Gonzar wants to swing that Warhammer, and Pendor is always good for a shank. But I want to show you how magic works. And so we're going to move on, and we're going to have Malfac cast Magic Missile. Casting a spell starts at the beginning of the combat round. Spells cannot be cast if the caster is in melee combat, although the referee might rule that even if the caster is within 10 feet of an opponent, if blows have not been traded, then a spell can be cast. Wands and staffs are not subject to the restriction at all. They can cast their magic during melee combat. If the spellcaster suffers damage while casting a spell, the spell is lost. When the spell actually takes effect depends on which combat sequence method is being used. Remember, this is one of 4 different combat examples in Swords and Wizardry. Add what you like, remove what you do not. The game is yours to adapt. Let's take a look at the spell Magic Missile right from the book. Spell level, magic user, first level, range, 150 feet, duration, immediate. A magical missile flies where the caster directs with a range of 150 feet. At the referee's discretion, this spell may have one of 2 effects. 1, the magic user must roll to hit the target with a +1 bonus to the roll. The missile inflicts 1d6 plus 1 points of damage. 2, the missile hits automatically, doing 1d4 plus 1 points of damage. In either case, the magic user casts an additional 2 missiles for every 5 levels of experience. Thus, at 5th level, the caster is able to hurl 3 magic missiles and 5 missiles at 10th level. It's cool, right? It's edgy. You have to roll an attack and it makes... Go ahead, be hardcore. But magic users need all the help they can get. And I want to wrap this tutorial up because I'm getting kind of hungry. And so we're going to choose the second option, which is an automatic hit at 1d4 plus 1 points of damage. Now, some other text to consider is that a magical missile flies where the caster directs. Do you need line of sight? It's magic. I could imagine Malfac is casting this magic missile up and over his party to hit the kobold. Again, give magic users a break. They need all the help they can get. And so I'm going to make the ruling, and we're going to go ahead and cast the magic missile and roll for damage. And that's going to be 3 points of damage, and that's going to be enough to take out Sniv. So with no further melee attacks or spells, that is going to do it for step 5. And that will bring us to step 6. The round is complete. Now for round 2, we wouldn't need to perform step 1, which is check for surprise. And we would head straight to step 2, declare spells, before step 3, rolling for initiative. Rinse and repeat, and you are well on your way to adventure, fortune, and glory, or the untimely demise at the hands of a denizen of the dungeon. And so I hope you enjoyed this Swords and Wizardry combat tutorial. If you are interested in buying the book or PDF, I'll put some links in the description below. Hey, if you enjoyed the content, please be sure to like and subscribe, and we will see you in a few weeks for our next episode of EpicSolo, in which we will feature Swords and Wizardry Complete Revised for our actual play solo play series in the 3-part mini-series, The Varisian Chronicles. And we will see you soon. Well, hey, look at that. Cash has survived this time. I'm the only one that killed anything. No, I also killed a kobold with my magic missile.
That's only because the referee cheated.